At a given level of technique and of intellect, a student shouldn't be taught how to play the piano per se, in my opinion, rather how to think, how to play. Give the student the tools to think, not that everything is optional and that everything is possible or equally available in terms of tempo, pulse, phrasing, articulation, pedaling, tempo, understanding of the genre within the style, the dynamic range of the polyphony, the expression of the elements of the thematic materials, the structure of the construction of the piece in terms of path through the storytelling or the narrative expression or just the pure musical expression of the piece. It seems to me like the music has been always a very important element of reflection for a given musician. For instance, you can have a very deeply involved, I would say, awareness of what you want to do. Perhaps by intuition, perhaps by analytical understanding of the score. But ultimately, if I can, as a teacher, give options, is that I know that the student who is visiting other teachers, playing for other teachers, either individually for a class or in general taking lessons, consulting, as they would do for people who need to find a doctor to trust. And there is no exact science in music, so the opinion of the one can be the contradictory of the other, and it is. They agree to disagree in their own way, but they play, you don't as a student, so you search to gather what you can. And I think it's very healthy. But on the other hand, the problem is, what do you do when you need to make the consensus of it? At which level do you as a student say, I'm going to follow my instinct, which might be against what I'm told? Not everybody has the talent of their drive. Would it be perhaps their musicianship that is, so to say, implied in their talent, with a character to withhold so many contradictions between famous older people? Would it be jury members of a competition or an audition or a jury for anything, and then you go through this and you listen to people who you don't meet because they're just people who you heard in performances and recordings, and so you have this kind of multiple hierarchy of idols to like or dislike, to grab from or not, a tempo from this, a touch from that, an ornament way of dealing with the other one. And you build your own, basically, construction. All this is very easy to say in words. In reality, it's more chaotic and therefore confusing for the student. So I guide the student in a way that I think each of the students has to find, and I guide them towards this, the fine line of balance between their intuition and what they learn, what I tell them, what they're supposed to know. Of course, they're intangibles, especially undergraduates, especially teenagers, for high school level students, or even homeschooled earlier ones. You can have an intellectual development earlier than the technical one, and then you have to catch up in order to express what you can think. But if you're only told what to do and you're just a very obedient performer, then inevitably comes a point where when you play pieces that reflect a certain philosophical statement of societal advancement, would it be the 18th, 19th century of Western Europe civilization, and what it means to play a slow movement compared to a fast movement, is a scherzo, is a minuet, is a imitation of a dance or imitation of a song, an aria, a storytelling. Do you have to imaginarily put in words in lyrics, so to say, in mind to motivate your right tempo, because this way you find the right flow of the tempo between too slow or too fast, which is a question of taste, rubato or not, or too much. And if you can find a way to express the finality, the point of view, the arrival point, the arching of the phrase, then you become part of the rhetorical narration and you enter in some kind of symbiosis with the composer's thought or what you perceive to be the composer's thought. And you play over and over and you record yourself. Nowadays it's easy with one button, and so you have a certain distance with yourself, or you compare it more often with others because they're so more available to be heard. How did so and so, dead or alive, of the preceding pianist who went through the score deal with this ornament, trill, crescendo, too early, not long enough? How do you manage to merge in traffic for a tempo or not be too early, too loud? How do you dosage all these things? It's not just mechanical, but some editions are more explicit than others, and ultimately the composers themselves in their notation leave the teacher and the student bewildered with the grace notes, which by essence are unmeasured, and therefore, given this kind of improvisational quality of the comment quality of the performer within the context of their time period, it was customary in their region, in their time period, so very restricted. Today is more universal, so we go through this kind of historic awareness about how we played or were played these elements in the time according to this and that article, this and that edition. And even when you know it, it doesn't mean that when you play it, you're convincing because you're convinced. You could play it because you recite it and because you know that there is an objectivity of the facts, at least the pitches and the notes, not necessarily, obviously, the unmeasured ones. And I prepare the students towards these elements of the subjective, where they have to express their own slight going out of the tracks, but reintegrating the tracks as well. Typically, how not to lose a tempo, instead of memorizing the metronome, but helpfully in practicing counting loud voice to become your own conductor. There is almost a duality with your own player, unlike the conductor and the orchestras that are in this kind of magnetic field energy between the one pulling and the one's playing, and the first one not playing. Here you play and you count, you organize details, but you have to think full statements. In other words, it's full of complex contradictions. A conductor would pick up a score which already is orchestrated before the conductor arrives to conduct it, and so the colors of the tones of the timbres chosen by the composer to illustrate their expression, their psychological suggestive expression to the audience through their colorization, so to say, of the timbres, of the tones of the orchestra, already predisposes of the display. When the pianists have only the piano timbre, therefore they only play with shades and lights and darkness and certain way of evoking rather than demonstrating what you choose to highlight. And therefore the detail overwhelms, and in order to play the details we have to count subdivided, but when we want to make the phrase we have to sing literally, sing the phrase in a multi-bar sense of the structure that is, of course, the bar lines are not heard by the audience, therefore it's sentences, it's phrases, some that end and some that bridge further to end further. And so, how do you keep the tempo? Of course, you cannot keep it rigidly metronomically. In fact, what you need to know when you play is that you need to know where are the points where you can not keep the tempo but catch it back. And that, once told, is a great solution for students, is that they don't have to worry of losing the tempo. They only have to know where strategically they can catch it back, meaning spots where it's not obvious in terms of sounding like artificially edited. Like, oops, I'm too late now, I have to catch back the tempo at once. That's not good. But sometimes the composers write, of course, in the same bar lines for most of the Western music. Of course, modern ones have different meters for each bar, but in the music of Brahms, Schumann, Chopin, Liszt, and so on, when you listen to it, it's full of fluidity, flexibility. The storytelling is full of, not all organized like Haydn and Beethoven, though with hemiolas and their own ways. They also accenting the wrong beats, so to say, not the down beats only, provocatively, or in a way breaking the pattern so that you don't follow always the same track. You keep alert like a good editor in a film, and you watch it and it keeps you alert by the way it edits it, the pulse of the harmonic rhythm of the motions of the sections that have a harmonic accelerando. When you have four chords in one, different chords in one bar, and you had 8 bars of one chord in each, inevitably the music itself creates that sense of accelerando, even if you keep it very steady, because of the harmonic rhythm change, or eventually if you don't want to do the crescendo within the accelerando, which is often unfortunately associated as ritenuto with diminuendo. Is also to do with the fact that when it modulates, so you have a sequence and you have something go a step further, you don't have to always accompany it with a crescendo or diminuendo like a good craftsman. You just let it happen because itself builds up. But sometimes you feel like your intense emotional response to it is part of the interpretation. So you have to be craftsman and artist, not co-composer, but well, reteller of the story, and at which level you remain honest to the score is not only because you recite it, but also. So there are subtleties in all these elements which I ping pong with the student often, because I show them how it could have gone, and when you see how it does go according to what the composer left us, we have to play it with a conviction. Not only because it's there, and the conviction where it leads us and how we go through it, and to give it a personal connection without to overwhelm it with our own emotional over it, taking in account the self text itself and the texture itself. And sometimes one bar can have so many more notes than another. When it's busier, it feels faster. And it's meant to be that, or a grace note added before a melodic note that is to be slightly delayed because it's almost like a syllable that is pronounced to be meaningful. You have to have this imagination to constantly translate the piano playing through singing and pulse and rhythm and structure and details and affects and pure flow, and let yourself in a situation where you control as much as you can in practicing the detail, but when you perform, the flow of the events have to happen. And of course that is very difficult for a student, because in the first visitation in one's life of a given piece, we practice it by sections until we put them together, but that doesn't mean that we play it as a piece. Movement or structure, whatever it is, even if it's theme and variations, which is relatively pre-cut, but even so, you can within the variation find different ways to develop the structure. In 109, Beethoven changes the meter from 3/4 second movement to 2/4 to 9/8. So the variations have little to do with each other, of course with a theme, and it's meant to be the art of conceiving the alterity within the unity of the composer, who bedazzles you with their imagination out of a simple element at the compositional level. But in the performing level, you have to be to a certain point aware of it, perhaps not analytically as if you composed it, but to have a GPS knowledge of where you're going in the piece and how you're going to negotiate this or that, so that when you might lose the tempo because of the overwhelming busyness of a texture section, then you make it up so that you can catch up where is less notes. You do that intuitively, accompanying a singer who needs a breath here or there, or takes an extra one because it's short of breath, or a wind or a bowed instrument musician with whom you play, who changes the bow at a point where they have to because they cannot go beyond. So our tempi in the piano are more intellectual, how adagio is slower than andante, or is it just at ease compared to andante being a walk. Is intuitively we feel, and of course we're told that what it means, but that doesn't define it, other than you have several beats a minute in the metronome marking, which until 1820s didn't exist. But the music itself tells us through its mood and how we played on the percussive instrument of the day compared to a plucked of the past, if it were, how we project it in front of people compared to then only played in a circle. How we balance the low keys and the top keys according to the length of sound and the harmonic bass, and how do we keep it in the pedal if we have to leave it in order to catch another thing, when they didn't use a middle pedal, which most of them didn't have anyway, and even if they did, they didn't mark it in the late 19th century, early 20th. So we can speculate a lot about the literal translation meaning of the word, interpretation, how we adapt it to the today's performance, ears, psyche, and especially the repetitivity, which was so essential to the Western music of the Romantic and before Classic, Baroque, and all this, that we decide what it was modernity in their own time, obviously, but that goes without to say. But we have to englobe it, and so that we find and define frame for the interpretation for each style within the genre, within the piece, and then within it organize ourselves so that we can be precise in the detail and find a way to find a track through the narration of the storytelling through a pulse without conductor, that we have to be of our own self, and tell ourselves not too early for the crescendo or now for the tempo. And I find that all this is fascinating, because you can always order the student to be your robot, which of course I don't, and I don't think we should, and I don't think anybody really is. It's just that in the early stages one can think that we need to give some, to young students, whatever young is, boundaries. And then afterwards, when they are able to conceive by themselves, you give them the responsibility to reimagine and to take it in account and to say, how do you think about it? And it doesn't mean that as a teacher you give up on teaching them what is supposed to be, in your opinion, at least in your construction of your life, because you come to them with your experience, and if your experience is a shortcut for theirs, that is not giving them a real education. It's more like cloning them. And let them experience things and tell them, guide them attentively. That's what I try to do. And individually for each, do I always do the right thing? I hope, because I have this intuition for each student's individual drive. It's a constant struggle to reach to be always the best at what I try to do for them, since I'm the hyphen between the pieces they play by the dead composers mostly and themselves discovering the piece, and me having traveled with the piece for my life, imagining how those seeds planted when they will be my age and I won't be around to know it, they will blossom their garden through all these different whatever energies they would have gathered from others, but ultimately within themselves, which is why I think it's not important at a certain level to teach how to play, but teach how to think in order to play.